So this is the work of the English painter David Hockney. They're both watercolors. One, I believe, is a work that he did when he was in California. And another, I think this one is from a landscape in Iceland, I believe. But he does these, travel sketch journals. So I wanted to show you David Hockney's work because he has a quote that is, I think, very apt for what we're doing here. It's quite simply, watercolors are wet colors in water. It's just really simple, it's really succinct, but I think it really is spot on when it comes to just a way to think about the medium of watercolor. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the materials for watercolor. Okay. So watercolors are wet colors in water. Now, I want to talk about basically the three main components for the materials. And these are the main things that I say, this is what you'll have to just pay some attention to, because I know that for a lot of folks, walking into an art store can be daunting, and it could be just a little bit of a headache sometimes. So I just say, okay, three main things to focus on: the paper, right? The paint, and the brush. Now, I'm not saying this is what you have to go ahead and splurge on or anything like that, but just to have an understanding of what we're dealing with here. So I'll just do a quick little rundown, because I think if you have a sense of what the paper is about, how the paint is made, and also why is the watercolor brush special, or what are the characteristics of the brush, it'll help you in your understanding and in the entire concepts of watercolor painting. So the paper, I suggested that we used a 140 pound or 300 gram cold press. Now there's cold press, and then there's also hot press, right? So I'll just give you a little quick explainer of what each is. Cold press is the paper pulp is put on sort of a rack, and as it dries, it gets a bit of a weave and a texture on the surface. Whereas hot press is actually, the paper ends up being rolled by a hot metallic cylinder, and so it gets quite smooth. So cold press is what I typically recommend for these types of courses, because they have that texture allows for a bit of layering, and the way that the water will actually sink into the paper will be different than hot press, which is so smooth. So I'm going to just show you here is a very, very zoomed in view of paper. I believe it's just actually like printer paper, computer paper, basic industrial paper. And the thing about paper is that you see how there are these fibers, these long fibers, and those fibers, they are often mixed. And if they're mixed, let's say in a big industrial vat, oftentimes they have a certain direction. And so that means that sometimes it's very easy to tear it in one direction as opposed to another direction. Other more handmade papers, the weave gets really, let's say, tangled, mixed together. And so the weave becomes tighter. And so with finer art grade, watercolor, higher grade papers, you get that sort of tighter weave of paper. What I would recommend is, if you want something, let's say, very archival, basically paper that will last forever, you look for 100% cotton rag, which is just that. It's cotton weave, and it's permanent. It's like oil paintings are done usually on canvas, usually on cotton or linen. So it has that permanency to it. It doesn't discolor and so on. But another aspect, which is very important with watercolor paper, is that there is a sizing that is included usually in that mixture. And the sizing is essentially to decrease how absorbent the paper itself is. You can imagine that if you did some watercolor painting on just this is just like a regular piece of printer paper, this paper is far more absorbent. So if I were to do a stroke on both of these, let's see, let's do it right here. The ability to lift off is a lot easier, you see, with the watercolor paper. And never mind if I were to, let's say, work into it a little bit. You know, if you work in, you could kind of lift it off even more. This, it just soaks in like a sponge. So if you think about rice paper, you know, like for example, those beautiful Japanese scrolls that are painted on rice paper, those are like a one-shot go where you just paint onto it and it just soaks in very quickly. Those don't really have the sizing inside. So, okay, so I just wanted to mention again, just about the paper, that, you know, the sizing itself will affect how absorbent it will be. So the characteristic of watercolor is that you can do these washes on top of the paper, and how it will basically sit and settle on the paper can determine just like how much control you have. For example, if you could lift it off or not.